So, full disclosure, I'm going to try to do this in one take because I have many skills. Video editing is not one, especially in the time I have. But I'm going to do some guidance here on how to maybe analyze results for a survey. I have videos on the others, and I will try to link them, either the previous ones I have or the upgraded ones. So starting off, what I have here is the raw data. So this is an old survey I made, and here's all the data from it. All right, so this is my raw data. Might notice that next to a lot of this stuff, right, I have numbers. So the very first thing you gotta do, right, is once you have your data, first things you want to do is maybe do something like this, where you assign a number to each question just to make it simpler. The big thing you really want to make sure you do is something called a question matrix. Right, question matrix is a pretty simple thing where it just has the answer. Right, for me, it's a strongly disagree to agree scale and a numerical code for that answer. Right, so that way I can basically say, hey, if you see a 1, that means strongly disagree, so on and so forth. This can be per question, or you can see like I did here, it's just right per questions 2 through 6 if you have a similar scale. The reason for this is that this is a defined way to transform your word-based answers into actual like numbers. Number of ways you can do this. Again, the agree to disagree scale is a pretty simple one of a 1 to 5 scale, or 1 to 4 if you cut out neutral. If you have like eco, anthro, or techno, you have each of those numbers. Again, the numbers itself don't matter too much. Just make sure that there is a like matrix somewhere that says, hey, when I say strongly disagree, I mean 1. Once I made my matrix for those questions, I actually went through and just right next to the row with all the answers, I just put in the code. So like if they say, hey, I strongly agree, I put there's a 5 here. Right, and this is just all raw data. It's not supposed to be like neat yet. This is just trying to get everything down. In order to add the columns here, right, you might notice, right, all you have to do there is just click right click and click insert, and it'll put a column to the left. Right. So went through on all my things here and put that. I also have a couple of things that are long answer. We'll get into those in a little bit. But this is kind of what your raw data probably looks like. For me, I got this just by downloading the spreadsheet attached to the Google form. So once I got all the question matrix set up and I went through and added all the numbers to each answer, right? What I did then is just make it a little bit easier on myself, because this is a lot to look at all at once. I created a tab at the bottom. To do that, you just click a plus here. I'll just add a new blank sheet. Right, and I have a data processing sheet. Right, so I have the question. Right, the question is class period, respected person, voice heard, support interesting. Please note I did shorthand here, and that's completely fine. Right, you don't need to like do all the like full question text again, specifically because it is over here. If you want, you can also put the question numbers, but I was worried about having too many numbers here and getting confused, so I just had a like shorthand. Then what I'm going to do is just for each question, I'm going to go over here to the column I made that has all their numbers, and copy that and paste it. If you want to paste things without formatting, for example, I think if I paste this normally, it's going to have this weird kind of like black and white, like alternating thing, which I personally don't like. So once you copy it, if you want to paste, right, if I just paste normally, you'll have that formatting. If you want to paste without it, that is Control instead of Control-Shift-V, or right-click, paste special, and then like there should be an option, yeah, values only, the 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I'm just going to keep doing that for the other 2 questions, just copying, pasting the stuff over. Just mainly this tab is more for right making things neat and a little bit easier for me to see, rather than anything like super. Right, that's its purpose here. It's just to make a little bit easier for all of us to see the data and to like analyze it, because this is a lot, especially with all the question text right there. Okay, so now that I have my do, I pasted it with the formatting, which I do not like. So let me undo that. So once you have all your data in, which I should have in just a second, right, then you can actually start doing the interesting stuff. Okay. Also, while I'm doing this, just to make sure you guys are paying attention, if you message me the word potato, I will give you some extra credit, just to make sure you're listening. Anyways, now that I have all this here, right, I have my class period, which is like for you guys that might be a demographic like age or gender, right? That's just like a demographic marker. And I have all my like raw data, quote unquote, right, of each of these survey responses in numerical form. Okay, so once you got that, a couple things you probably want to do there. First one you want to do is probably mode, right, for each question, and then a number each percent or number of each responses that is a certain number. So with the mode, that is equals mode parentheses, and you just give it the numbers you want, and you're done, right? So the mode here is a 5, right? That means the most common answer there was a 5. Let's repeat that for other questions. And since it's all set up in the same, I can actually drag it over. Okay, so that's my mode, right? That's a pretty useful thing to know is what the most common answer is. Probably, however, what you actually will be working a lot with is either the number or percent of responses in each that is as a number, right? So this percent of responses, that's a 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This is a little bit more complicated in Excel, but you can do it. Excel can do it for you, or you can always just go through and count by hand. I have 49 responses, so maybe a little bit much to count by hand. The way to do this is equals count if function. Okay, count if, right? You tell it the range. Okay, so I'm going to say and the criteria, which in my case is 1. You do have to put in parentheses. It doesn't work otherwise. Basically, what this is what telling Excel to do is, hey, look at rows C20 to C50, right? And count the number of cells that have a value of 1. This should be 0. Okay. If I want to make this a percent, like out of the total, all I have to do is just do divide by count, right? And same things, right? Okay. And this is just saying, hey, take the number of cells that have a value of 1 divided by the total count. And you can just drag this formula over, right? And you see I actually had 1, 1 here. Okay. And you do the same thing again, just changing all that to a 2. So count if, same range. Only difference is the value is a 2 instead of, right, a 1. You can drag it across because all these have the same number of responses, and just repeat for all of those. And the general tip with survey data is you want to just analyze it as many ways as you can think of, which we'll get into just a second. Let's keep on doing the count if function. So you might notice, even though these are meant as percentages, and they are, they don't look like it, they look like decimals. If you want to change that, or just neaten these up so they're not as many decimal points, the way to do that is you highlight the cells you want and right click and go to the format cells option. So again, you just highlight the cells you want, right click, and format cells, right? And this should be the main one that pops up, but there's all sorts of things here. You want to make sure you're on the numbers tab, right? This basically is a way for you to tell Excel what these represent. Right now, they're just in general form, right, where there's nothing. I'd either put them as numbers, right, with 2 decimal places, or you can also put in percentages, again, and you can change them to decimal places here, right? The actual numbers are the same, right? It's just now a lot neater for us to like process. Okay. So you can also do this not only by like overall groups, you can also do it by subgroups. For example, this is class data. Periods 2 and 3 are HL. Periods 5, 6, and 7 are SL. One thing you can do if you want, right? You might notice here that I have some like things out of order where I got one random 6 period, like and one over here. Is if you want, you can always have Excel organize data for you, right? So just highlight the data you want and go to, where it is, I'm just going to sort it, right? And just sort it. Click, make sure you expand the selection, and it should sort by question, order. Yeah. Oh, never mind. Sort is not one I have a lot of experience with. There you go. So if you're stuck, you can type things in the search bar, right? And now it's sorted by largest to smallest. So now I have everything lined up in class order, which doesn't change any of this, right? Because the actual numbers are always the same, right? But if you do start breaking down by subgroups and then move stuff around, right, that will mess with it. So make sure you doing sort of sorting before you do data analysis. So now I have all my stuff lined up nice. I can do stuff like, how many in my HL classes, what was the, right, which is periods 2 and 3, right? What was the number of people who said a 5? Okay. And over my question, and I can do the same thing over here, right? Just include the range as only people's in 7th, 6th, and 5th period. Other than that, it's all the same, right? When people gave a 5, divided by count, right? I'm doing this count formula again just to have a percentage, because sometimes, especially with comparing SL and HL, right, where there's a different number of overall people, sometimes it's better to have a percentage because that way it's kind of normed and you can it's a little bit easier to compare. Again, just to make these numbers a little bit nicer, I can format cells, percentages, and I'll make it 1 decimal place. Okay. And then now I can kind of see some data, right? For example, HL generally has better scores than SL, right? So that might be something to look at, right? So that's one thing. And then, right, I could break this down by any sort of other groups, right? I could break it down by class period if I wanted to. I could break it down by before and after lunch. At this point, right, once you kind of have this first part done, this next part is whatever groups you want to break it down by. You could do it by age, gender, any sort of demographics or other groupings you notice. Feel free to data analyze this. For a lot of the survey, a lot of it is kind of just throwing data analysis at the wall and seeing what comes out on the other side. So beyond this data processing, you do need some other stuff. You probably want something called correlational data, but right now we're going to go over graphs because it's a lot of data, right? And it can be kind of hard to parse all at once. And a graph is the easy way to do that. So graphs can be a little bit finicky, but the general simple way to do this, for example, let's take all this data here. Let's say I want to graph a histogram of this data here. So I'll highlight the data, go to insert, right? And there should be an option for a histogram here, right? Boom. You can see it automate a lot. For example, this number of people between 2 and 2.71, all that. This is not, you can change this, right? Either in, right, which would be in chart design, right? You can either select more data if you want to mess with the data. For example, if I want to exclude outliers or other stuff like that, I could mess around with the data and change what data I select. You can also go to format and mess with things like, like the style. You want to make it that. Please note, this is not an art project, so the style needs to be functional more than anything else. Make sure for every graph you add, make sure the chart title is changed from this. Make sure you have axis titles so I know what this represents. For a lot of you guys with surveys, this will be count, right? And this will be question response range. You can also go to the axes themselves, right? You go to more options, and this is where you can change your bottom thing. For example, here, right? Change it to by category, which, oh god, that broke it. But let's see. Again, not as familiar with charts. Sometimes a lot of this is kind of just messing with things, right? Right, so here you can do automatic bin width and things like that. For example, if I wanted to, it'd probably take a little bit more time finicking around that I want to spend in this video, but I could have it by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and just have the count of each of these. Because right now it's kind of weird, right? Because there is no 3.42 to 4.13. This is just counting the 4s, and this is just counting the 3s. Right. Another way to kind of force this sometimes is to, again, do the select data and, do it by do it by, this be, you can literally do it by individual value. And that will kind of force the chart to do what you want, right? %2. I'm just clicking the values here. So again, if you want to, you're always free to kind of force charts to do what you want by just selecting the data and putting it in the right way. Again, no general big tips here other than you just gotta kind of sometimes just mess with it and just be ready to struggle a bit, and sometimes be ready to just kind of be like, that's good enough. 4. Why is it doing that now? Excel's a mystery even to me. It does things. It tries to be helpful, but it doesn't always know what it's trying to do. So sometimes the help is less helpful than it'd like to be. Okay, so now I changed the data thing, so now it should be, now it just broke more, of course. But you kind of get what I'm saying, hopefully, in that you can mess around with the data types and the select datas. If you want, you can always, that's what I did. Okay, I put multiple things over each other. If you want, you can also always highlight this and maybe change it from a histogram to a pie chart, right? That might be a little bit better. So again, a lot of this, the chart time is somewhat just playing around, right? Excel will be helpful and we'll try to, why is it putting, right? It will kind of try to show what it will make in advance. For example, this one here, I don't know where it's getting the 41s from. I really don't, but here's a pie chart for some reason. Yeah. Sometimes it's better to, do a pie chart by this, right? Sometimes it can be a little easier to just graph your overall data because that's a little bit more clear for both the graph and the actual thing, right? So that makes it look a lot better than whatever it was doing before, right? I can see here, cool, pretty simple. I see most of my values are 5 or 4, a little bit of some 3s, less 2s. Again, same thing here. Well, make sure you add a chart title. If you want any elements, those are here, right? If you want data labels, that can be helpful here as well. Again, for charts, the more the better, right? I might make a chart for each one. So this would be responses to question 2, because on the other spreadsheet over here, that I named this one question 2. And I can do the same thing for 3 and 4 and 5, right? Or 3, all of them. Just kind of keep on going through. It's actually question 3. Question 3. Because question 2 is a class period. All right, so you can just keep on doing this for each one. If you also want, you can also do something like this, where you compare, where you can do comparisons, maybe with a pie chart. That's better with a histogram or a bar chart. Bar charts and histograms are basically the same thing. Okay. Again, you can label it here. Label series 1, series 2.
Hello, sir.
Hi. So, last thing to talk about in this video is correlational data, right? Because since all our data is in the form of numbers, you can actually find a causation, right? You can see if there's, if someone's score on one question affects their score on another question, right? So maybe, people who feel more respect to this person in my class find it more interesting. There's a way to do this in Excel, but you don't have to because it can be complicated. So if you want to find this sort of data, if you have all this, this is correlational data. So you go, what you're going to do for that is you're going to go to the internet and you're just going to type in, correlation coefficient calculator. Okay. And you'll just go to the first one. I prefer social science because it's the one I know. Please make sure if you use any of these sources here, this is a source I would cite because, I'm using it. It's not mine. So all you gotta do for that is just, copy the responses to the one question, put that in the x values, copy the response to the other question, put in the y values. Okay. Right, and since all these are numbers, right, we can actually do math with them and see if there's any correlation, right, if they impact each other at all. Okay. So what you do now, it does tell you all sorts of stuff. Right, you can see plots here. So first of all, value of R. R is the actual correlation coefficient. Oh my God, right, actual correlation coefficient. If it's positive, that means there's a positive correlation, right? As one increases, so is the other. And the closer it is to 1, the more correlated they are. So R of 1 would be there's a perfect correlation. R of -1 would be a perfect negative correlation, right? This is a pretty good correlation. Right, so you have all of this. However, we're not done, right? Because not only do we need an R value, we need a P value. The P value, again, would tell us if these things actually impact each other, right? Because we can see here there is a correlation, right, of 0.65, but we want to make sure there's actually a P value, right? Make sure there's actually an effect on each other. So what you do here is you put in the R score, right, which this tells you. You just copy and paste that. The N is just the number of entries that is here, right? It says N equals 49. Okay, significance level is 0.05, and then calculate. Again, you'll have to also cite this one too. Okay, there we go. And it tells you here the p-value is less than 0.1%. This result is significant. So what this basically saying to me is, cool, based on your data, there is a correlation, right? That people who, right, feel more respected do find my class more interesting, right? There is a impact there that is significant, right? There is something happening. It's not just random chance, right? There is something happening. Again, once you have this one, I'd make sure you write that down somewhere over here. For example, you could be like, cool, R of question 3 and 6, right? And that would be 0.65. And then you can just do the same of P of Q 3 and 6. And that was 0.0001. Technically less than that, but overall, all the same. Okay. So just kind of for assessments for surveys, right? I'd say you can follow vibes if you want, right? So if you see like, hey, I think these things affect each other, that would be a great way to like actually go in and dive. Though in general, the more graphs, the more like ways you view data, the better. Kind of the last thing is, right, I know some of you have this, I do have, right, over here, I have like data that is not in the answer like this, right? I can't change this into numbers. There's no matrix I can make from this because there's so many different answers, right? If you do want to analyze this type of data, right, there is a tool for that, right? You'll copy it. Okay. And what you can do to kind of process a little bit of quotes there, your data, is a word cloud, right? Let me clear this. Right, so all you gotta do is you just paste in all your text, and there you go. Okay, so now this is not anything you can do stats with, but if you want, you can actually, right, cite this, save this as a picture, right? And the general idea here is that the bigger a word is, the more it was mentioned, right? So a lot of people mentioned that everything went well with this unit. So, right, dinner people mentioned jet rats, review, a lot of things about cells. Right, so this is a way to kind of break down that sort of like long answer or short answer mention into something you can kind of process. Though with that, a lot of the, right, this data here is either stuff you kind of have to just talk about in vibes or stuff that adds context to this, right? For maybe, right, it can add context to be like, okay, cool, this person had 5s, but they also were like, hey, right, they felt confident in what they knew. So hopefully this is helpful. Again, this is where I started with most of my raw data. This is literally the spreadsheet Google Forms generated for me. I just kind of downloaded it and have been working with that since. Biggest things here, again, is once you have your questions, you could make some number of matrices. For example, I have a table here that turns question numbers into question text. So I can be like, in question number 2, that way I don't have to type that question out every single time I talk about it. Right, and then I have questions right over here. And this is the big part. This is what you especially need to do, and you will copy and paste this into your Word document, is a matrix for each question or questions, depending on how you group them, with an answer and some sort of numerical code per answer. Again, this is just make sure that when you're looking at the data and when I'm reading the data, I know like, hey, if I'm looking at a mode of 5 here, I know what that means for your actual like question. Once you get all the question matrix made, you're going to go through, right, go through and add in the values. Once you got that, I would go to a separate sheet, line up the questions on top, and then just put the data underneath it for each data set. For each question, you want to find the mode in either the count or percent of responses that is each like answer, each like number. Beyond that, right, add in, you can look at things by subgroup, especially the demographics marks you mentioned are good things to do. For example, let's see if there's a difference in like the mode between men and women, or the number of responses that are a 3 between men and women, or like between 16 and 17-year-olds. After that, you want to add in graphs. Again, this is one that takes some finicking around with. A lot of it is just inserting stuff and hoping that Excel kind of gets things right. And if not, you kind of just yell with it. Right, and again, graphs are in the insert panel up here. You can either do recommended, which will kind of give you different options. You can just pick one that you like, or you can do it by like actual like chart type. And I need to actually give these things titles. Do not do what I'm doing here. And then lastly, if you do, since all your questions are numbers, if you want to see if there's any correlation between the score of one question and another, which a lot of you are doing for your thing, for example, if there's a score between like their animal choice and how likely are they to save the environment, that is when you'd highlight